Today we were doing a professional development on vocabulary. So our objectives are, why is indirect vocabulary instruction important? And hoping that you can implement new ways of previewing and connecting vocabulary. And hopefully these are new ways for you. So we're going to start off with a little game. You know, 2 truths and a lie. We're gonna have, you always play it with your kids as an icebreaker. Yeah. So here are 4 truths. So I want you guys to read each one of these facts, and I want you to figure out which one is the lie. And you can discuss it when you're done, which one you think it is. So I guess I should read it out loud. Number 1 is high school graduates need to know between 60,000 and 100,000 words. Number 2 is only about 300 to 400 words are taught through direct instruction. The rest are learned by way of indirect methods and like repeated exposure and reading. And number 3 is students must learn about 1,000 new words per year. And number 4 is students in grades K through 2 learn about 800 new words per year by way of oral language. So talk about which one do you think, which one
feels high to me.
It does feel high.
But it's probably not as high as it feels like it is. Because I'm just thinking about our 5th graders. Are they still learning 1,000 words in a year? That's
new words.
New words, right.
Yeah, I think maybe number 3.
Number 3?
False.
Number 3 is the lie.
Oh.
However, the truth is students must learn about between 2,000 and 3,500 new words per year.
Wow.
So,
up till what point?
till they graduate, like each year.
Wow.
Yeah. So,
Wow.
with that being said,
Wow.
this is the second one. All right. Number 1 is high knowledge 8th graders have vocabularies that are about equal to the lowest performing 12th graders. Number 2, high school seniors near the top of their class know about 4 times as many words as their lower performing classmates. Or number 3, 1st grade children from higher socioeconomic groups know about twice as many words as children from lower socioeconomic groups. So talk about which one you think is the lie out of these 3.
That one seems reasonable to me.
I'm wondering if it's more than
It might be
twice,
more than
though.
that. I know, you're right.
4 times as many words as grade 1.
I know it's 8th graders.
That's kind of a shock, because I feel like that's true.
Mm.
Or maybe it's lower.
I think you might be right about this one. I think it might be that 1st grade children from higher socioeconomic groups know even more than twice as many words as children from lower.
Go
About
with
that
3
one?
again?
Okay, 3 is not it.
Ooh.
Number 1 is the lie,
Wow.
and it's actually high knowledge 3rd graders
Wow.
have vocabularies that are about equal to the lowest performing 12th
Wow.
graders.
Yikes.
So that was one of the most shocking things
Yeah.
to me. So that's that. So the reason why we're doing this is because in most schools we don't have any sort of vocabulary program. A lot of teachers, they kind of look at it and hope that somebody purchases something, but really all you need to do is learn some research-based strategies that you can implement to anything, into any sort of subject, any sort of reading, an article, a book, a magazine, whatever it may be. So hopefully today I will teach you different ways of implementing your own words into different vocabulary strategies. So if you turn the page, the rationale at the top is, it basically just says that vocabulary instruction has been overshadowed. So thinking about our school, like Sandwich, we are so concerned with guided reading and comprehension strategies and decoding and phonics and things like that, that vocabulary kind of gets put by the wayside, and we don't think of ways in which we can really truly implement it on a daily basis. And thinking about those statistics, we need to, and that's the way that you can boost up your comprehension. So what we're going to do is learn about why vocabulary is so important. So it says words can help access background knowledge. It helps us to express ideas and concepts and to communicate appropriately with others. and is linked strongly to academic success and comprehension. And so once you know more vocabulary, you're able to construct it. You're able to learn and make connections with newer things. So if you look at the comic at the bottom, I thought it was kind of funny.
Maybe. You are very good at it.
So it just kind of plays on the fact that vocabulary is really important in order to be successful in the real world in the long term. So, what I wanted to do is I wanted to start off with a little simulation. And in this reading up at the top is part of Hemingway, one of his works. And what I want you to do is I want you to read through the passage and try to answer the questions at the bottom. Now, obviously there are some words missing, and that's on purpose. So you need to try to think about what you do in order to fill in those missing vocabulary words as if you weren't able to decode those words. They don't really exist because think about your students, if they don't know what the word means and they're not recognizing or knowing different ways to solve it, it's like the word never existed on the page. So take a few minutes to read through it and try to answer the questions at the bottom. You're more than welcome to chat with one another if you want to figure out.
Teamwork.
Yes.
Hard.
It's about catching a fish.
It felt confusing because it was hard to hold on to the story because I kept having to think back to what I had put in because it wasn't real. So I had to like hold on to.
Here's
You know,
kind of it. Well, you can, if you wanted to fill in any of the words as you were thinking about it or
Oh.
whatever it may be. So
I kept thinking about part of speech, like just then the blank line, so I knew it was going to be an adjective.
I feel like it's an apples.
Yeah.
I have to rate my words and have to do measure those vocabulary words. I would say it felt a little confusing. Or like you were thinking about, instead of thinking about what it was about, you were thinking about what could that word be.
Right.
Mhm.
Right.
Applying strategies to help you make meaning from the passage.
I liked how you talked about the part of speech. Sometimes if we lose that grammar instruction, they don't have that strategy to rely on.
That's true, because that's another one that kind of goes by the wayside.
Right.
And we assume is embedded, but it's not necessarily.
Right.
The ones that, too, like the ones that had more than one in one sentence
Mhm.
were really hard.
Right.
Because there was so much more meaning that was kind of up in the air.
Right.
Like at the end, that last long sentence.
Or even the blank would be pulled and you could see
Right.
the what.
Right. So in this passage, this is missing 80% of the words. So if your students only know 80% of the words in their reading, say textbook or something that's nonfiction, this is what it looks like to them. And how difficult it is for them to actually understand what they're reading because, like you said, they're paying attention to they're paying attention to what the word could be. So this is what it should look like. So just then, the stern line, these words I would never imagine inserting, came taut under his foot where he had kept a loop of the line,
Not
and he
right.
dropped his oars and felt the weight of the small tuna's pull as he held the line firm. And commenced to haul it in.
Wow.
Did you maybe the tuna, you probably inserted fish or whatever it may be, but,
Right.
and then the shivering increased as he pulled in, and you could see the blue back of the fish in the water and the gold of his sides before he swung him over the side and into the boat. He lay in the stern in the sun, compact and bullet. I actually wrote the words, so then I had to try to cross it out and rewrite it. Shaped his big, unintelligent eyes, staring as he thumped his life out against the planking of the boat with the quick strokes of his fast-moving tail.
Wow.
Yeah, so thinking about that and what it's actually like to be a student who doesn't have a very strong vocabulary or way of attacking the vocabulary, it's, you can't even begin to guess.
Well, and what I'm thinking too is the picture is so vivid with all of that strong vocabulary.
Right.
And so for
How
a
much
reader,
units.
that's exciting. And for
Right.
somebody who's missing out on the vocabulary,
Right.
Yeah.
it wasn't that, it didn't
Even the
do much
boat
for
I
me.
pictured was not the same boat as
Right.
what
Oars
described
and
the oars.
things. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, and even I heard you when I said big unintelligent eyes
Yeah.
staring. It kind of gives you that. You said, "Oh, like
Aw.
that poor fish is dying," but you don't get that
No.
idea because you're trying to figure out everything else. So this is the vocabulary comprehension connection. So when we say that comprehension is getting like the spotlight, it really should be vocabulary and comprehension together. So comprehension is more than recognizing words. So we need more than vocabulary, but without those recognition, comprehension is clearly impossible. So when you look at the Frontis and Pinnell and how those benchmarking things and those percentages, this is where they basically come from. You need to know about 90 to 95% of the words to fully understand and participate in comprehension discussions. About 90% you can pretty much guess at unfamiliar words and get main ideas, but less than 90%, like this was 80%, you really have no chance at figuring out what's going on. So that's the importance, I guess, of the Just Right book, but also helping to build those vocabulary strategies and ways of attacking new words. So.
That's pretty eye-opening.
It is, and so that's why I was hoping to front load with some facts, because it's really important to know why you need it. You know, vocabulary, we always say we need to do it, but it's so easy to just not do it because it's not at the forefront of our brains. But it really is probably one of the most important things that they need to be able to do. So, on the next page, you don't have to write anything, but just we can have a conversation about ways that you teach vocabulary in your classroom when you have the opportunity to do it. So what are some things, how do you teach vocabulary? What are some things that you do?
I know, like in guided reading, I pull out words that I think the students won't know and just directly teach them, or try to activate their background knowledge around the word.
Yeah, like Greek and Latin roots.
I've used, this past year, I started with a new online thing called Flocabulary.
Oh,
but
yes.
I do know vocabulary.
I do.
So that was good because it was interactive and the kids loved that.
Yeah, it was.
In the past, I've done Wordly Wise, but our district doesn't support that at this point.
We did pictures with the words, so
Mhm.
like to somehow represent the meaning of it, get the word in the picture. I was like cartoons with the words. The Frere model, so the definition, not the definition, a picture.
Also, I guess, sort of teaching them how to use a glossary or a dictionary. That's
So the reference
Yeah.
tools. And it's interesting, in all the things that I was reading, the whole purpose of those tools are just that. It's supposed to be a reference, not how you teach something. It's supposed to be how you can just look back and try to figure it out. Like when you're reading on a Kindle, you want to know a quick way of figuring out what that word is. You just click on it and it tells you, and you're able to input it in there because you have all those other skills to create, you know, those synonyms that fit in there to help you understand it. So it was just talking about how we rely so much on reference tools to do the teaching that we forget that that's not their purpose. they're important, but not the
Right.
sole way of doing it.
Right.
So what is a formal vocabulary program that you may have at your school?
We did use
Okay.
Wordly Wise in 5th grade last year for vocabulary.
Other than that, we don't.
Yeah, we don't have one.
Right. And then we made a list of some activities that we did to improve student vocabulary, which is a very good list of a lot of nice ones. Vocabulary is a cool one with the different pictures and the graphs and things like that.
Kids love it.
Yeah, they do.
That's good.
All right, so we're going to start off with indirect instruction or exposure. So when we talked about in the opening activity how we can teach 300 to 400 words directly, and they need to know between the 2,000 and 3,500 words in a year, so that means that we need to indirectly introduce them through exposure and through reading between 1,600 and 3,100 words, new words, each year, which is a very daunting task. So if you look at, we always tell students that they need to read for 20 minutes each night, but this is a really cool graph in trying to hit home how important it actually is for their vocabulary development. So if you look on the first column, it talks about minutes per day outside of school. And so if you look at the difference, I highlighted 21 minutes because I know a lot of times you tell them to read for 20 minutes. So the difference between 21 minutes and then 9.6 minutes, and you just scroll right across and it says words read per book each year. So it goes from almost 2 million down to 600,000. So it's that 10 minutes is a huge, huge difference.
Wow.
And so the original chart just had the first two columns. The last two columns I added on based on research. So have you ever heard of the study called the Vocabulary Conundrum? It was in the early 90s. So basically this was their way of trying to figure out how many words should a child know in order to be successful. So that's where those stats came from. It came from this study. And from there they wanted to try to figure out when you're reading, how much are they actually getting out of it? How much is that indirect exposure really helping their vocabulary? So what they came up with was basically that 1 out of 20 words that you read, you kind of absorb over time. So that's what this one is. Words learned from reading per year is that 1 out of 20.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so each year they can learn 1,800 words just from reading 20 minutes at home. And then I just did it from grades 3 to, it should be grades 3 to 12, not 3 to 9. But that's 18,000 words just from reading 20 minutes at home. But then if you go down to the kid that doesn't read at home, all the way at the bottom, they only get 80 words.
That's alarming.
Right,
Because we know we have those kids.
right,
And those are the kids who need vocabulary development even, I mean,
Exactly.
they all do, but
right.
they're already behind.
Right. And when I looked at this, the first thing that came to my head, and I think it's from the special ed in me, is, well, you have those kids that probably can't sustain reading for 20 minutes because reading is so difficult for them. So there is good news, bright light at the end of the tunnel. In 1991, there was a study of 6th grade students, and they were read aloud to, and they acquired just as many new vocabulary words as the students that read to themselves. So there is a light at the end of the tunnel for those kids that are having a hard time with reading, and that just shows that when a parent says, well, they can't read it, they don't want to read at home, they can't get through a book, well, this is your time to read with them, because they're going to get just as much out of it through the conversations and through listening to them, and that's okay. Like, they don't have to do the reading. They're still going to get exposure to good vocabulary through the read aloud. So,
That's really good.
yeah, so
I
that's
always struggle with that.
I know.
I mean, I want the parents to be involved, but I also
Right.
sometimes struggle with, I needed you to tell me that. Because
Yeah.
sometimes I struggle with, no, they really should probably read on their own
Right.
too.
right. And what I liked about that is it was 6th grade students. It's not 3rd grade students. Like, we know 3rd graders, they get a lot out of read alouds, but this is 6th grade. This is when they're in middle school, and they still get a lot from it. So it's important to think about. And it, like you said, it's kind of reassuring that that's okay. It's not a bad thing. So throughout the entire professional development, I'm going to just show little indirect ways that I've taught vocabulary in the past. And so I'm going to start off with one of them. And it is, well, there are games. It's categories. Have you ever played categories in your
Yeah.
classroom? So good.
Yeah.
And it's a quick game. It's nice breaking up between different blocks. And what's cool is if you Google it, a lot of teachers have them in smart boards or different presentations, and you could just put it on the screen. And what I did is we had a VIP, and I just said, okay, the VIP gets to pick the first letter, and they pick the letter, and we start the timer, and it's great. And it's just becoming more word conscious. They're not, maybe they'll get some exposure to new vocabulary, but it's more thinking about words and enjoying words, and that will get them a little bit more motivated in the long run. The other one is, I always played Simon Says when I had new vocabulary words. So with geometry, that's the easiest one to think off the top of my head. Just thinking about those different things. And when we, in Wareham, when we had a vocabulary program, it's okay, it's all right. When we had a vocabulary program, I would introduce the words and we'd come up with movements together. So if we had the word undulate, we would do this. And so it was cool because I had the word wall of all the words we've learned throughout the year, and every once in a while I pull out a word when we were playing Simon Says from September, and it's amazing that they remember the definition, can use the definition because they have that movement to connect with it. So it's
whole brain thing.
It is. It gets the learner, the kinesthetic learner, and the visual learner, and the auditory learner all together. So
we did that as part of our vocabulary when we would do vocabulary weeks. The second day we spent coming up with gestures, and then we would do the gestures along with the video, and yeah, it does make a difference.
It does make a difference, and it's they want to play Simon Says. They love Simon Says, and so. And even when they're out, they can still do the movements in their seat. So just because the game's over for them doesn't mean that the learning's over for them. And then this is the last one. It's called Scrabble Slam. And it's more of an approachable game for kids. And so basically what happens is these cards have letters on either side, and they have the letters up in the corner. So this tells you what's on the front and then what's on the back. So when you look at your hand, you know what cards you have. And so you start off and you think of a 4-letter word, any 4-letter word. So anybody? 4-letter word? Bike. So you look through this and you try to find the letters for bike, B-I-K-E, and then we hand out the cards to everybody. And what we do is somebody says, ready, set, slam, and you just put down one card to change the word just a little bit. It has to be spelled correctly. It can't be a repeat, like say we had bike and I had K, I can't put K on top of the K to make bike again, but I can repeat that word if we've changed it already to like bite, and then I can put down the K. So it's like a fast moving game, thinking about words, thinking about how you can manipulate words, and
word families.
Exactly. Exactly. And so, yeah, it's a cool, fast paced game for kids. So
it reminds me of a more fun way of doing making words.
Yes,
where you have the tiles. And,
yeah. So that was that. So that's our first indirect exposure. Woo! If you turn the page, we're going to get into direct instruction, a few different tactics. And basically, when I was reading about different things, they had the analogy of meeting a word is like meeting a person. And so if you think about when you're at a social gathering, when you meet a person, if you have the social skills and you have the motivation, you're going to be able to meet that person and get to know them a little bit. If you're a wallflower or you don't have the motivation, you're not going to meet anybody new. Now, if you go to a party and you have a host that is a really good host and introduces you, like the teacher introduces somebody to a new word, they can create that background knowledge, like, oh, this is a teacher, like she's a teacher too, and like gives you that background to connect to, so that it's easier to become friends with them. And then if you take them outside of that setting, outside of that party, and meet them several times in different settings and different experiences, you create different connections, kind of like creating different connections with words when you find it in different texts and how excited the kids are. So it's kind of thinking about, it's thinking about previewing. So the first one is a self-awareness chart. It has other names. It's called the word knowledge checklist or vocabulary knowledge sort. Have you ever heard of the, maybe you do once you see it. Yeah. So it's for when to use it is before reading, or you can use it throughout a unit. And this is how you preview words in a quick way so that you don't have to pre-teach every single word. So what you do, you choose 10 to 20 words from an article. And I didn't put in here how you actually choose the words, so I gave some suggestions for how you choose it. Words that are necessary to understand the text, like you had said, words that are key to understanding a major concept, unfamiliar specialized academic words, words that are unfamiliar to most students, or multiple meaning words are like the key one that sometimes we forget about because you see them and you think that they're so easy, but you forget that they have different meanings for different people. And it basically avoid words that have the definition right next to it because they'll be able to figure it out and use other skills. So this is just a smaller version of what you have on the next page. And I use that analogy of knowing somebody to make the categories at the top. So best friends forever is the ones that you know and you can use in several settings in several different ways, give examples of. Acquaintance is somebody that you've met, like a word that you've met, and you kind of know the definition, can't really give a definition, but you kind of know it. And a stranger is one you've never heard before. And you can expand these categories. I just didn't have enough room on this chart to expand them. But sometimes I put like a friend right here, and the friend is a word that I can't explain, but I know how to use it. And obviously the stranger still stays the same. So the way that you can use this is, what I do is we choral read out loud. So you can be my students as we go through. So the first word is encounter. Everybody?
Encounter.
Good. So it gets them to hear the word, know how to pronounce it, because if you don't know how to pronounce a word, you're never going to be able to use it. Next one is context.
Context.
Third is phonologically.
Phonologically.
Orthographically.
Orthographically.
Lexical.
Lexical.
Inferential.
Inferential.
Initiate.
Initiate.
Cues.
Cues.
Vague.
Vague.
Incidental.
Incidental.
Contextual clues.
Contextual clues.
Morphological.
Morphological.
And acquire.
Acquire.
So then what you do next is you tell the students to rate how well you know the words. And the reason why this is so important is because it gets them to start thinking about their background knowledge having to do with these words. Think about, oh, I wonder what the text is going to be about, so it gives a little intrigue. And it also helps to train their brain to become aware of when they don't know a word. Because sometimes, like you said, they just railroad right through and they don't realize that they don't know it. And sometimes in the beginning when you first introduce this, you're going to have kids that say, everything's my best friend, I know absolutely every single word, and then you ask them to like own up to it, like, oh God, and so then they have to move themselves further back based on what they're capable of understanding. So the next step is that you allow the students to go and mark what they know. If it's a best friend word, think about what you think the definition is, think about what an example is. After 1 or 2 minutes, because it shouldn't take that long, you just put a check in whichever one it is, you have partners discuss the different words. So if you have a best friend word that you think is a stranger, you can discuss what you think the meaning is. Or if you have 2 best friend words, discuss what you think the meaning is and see if you can kind of triangulate what you're doing. And then at the end, we go through and I go through each one of the words and I say, okay, anybody have best friends with encounter when they explain it to us? And you put it in kid-friendly words for them. And what they can do is, as they read the passage, they can refer back to this. Or, yes, exactly. And what's important is when you give the definition, don't give the definition right from the dictionary. Give a kid-friendly definition that they're going to be able to use. But what's also cool about this is if you use it in long term, you choose a bunch of concept words. And most of the time they're going to be strangers to all of them, but throughout the unit, as they learn it in a different lesson, they can move it across and like reflect on, what did I learn? What do I still need help with? So it's a way of monitoring their progress. So
I like it too because of the whole reflection piece, because I find that, like you said, everyone is a best friend, and then when you say that they're, like I hear all the time, I can't really explain it. I know it, but I can't explain it. So it makes them really think about, you have to be able to explain it in order to know it.
Exactly.
Really.
And you know, it's okay to be an acquaintance with the word. You don't know it well enough yet, and that's okay. And it's making them realize that you don't know everything, and that's totally fine. Another way that I usually, or some ways that I've done this, was I did it with 4 corners. And I labeled each one of them one of these categories. And so if you're a best friend with this word, go to this category or this corner, and it's more of a movement break. And so you take all the kids that are in the best friend corner, and you're like, okay, who wants to tell us what the definition is? And you'll find that kids are like, I'm like, okay, you need to go to acquaintance, and you just move them right across. And so it makes them realize that, okay, well, maybe I should be more honest, because she's going to hold me accountable for knowing what this is.
I don't want to be put on the spot.
Well, exactly. So that's another way of doing it. The third way you can do it is you can give them cards, and you can put the categories at the top, and they can sort the cards. And so as you are talking about them and discussing it, you can move the cards throughout the category. So it's more of a tactile way of doing it. So those are different ways that I've done it. But take a minute or 2 to see which words you know, which words you still need help with, and then you can discuss the different words.
I think we did the same exact thing. I have one. I have lexical, and you're no wait. Which one is it?
Oh, phonologically.
Phonologically.
Which actually I probably should be an
Phono,
acquaintance too,
it's
because I
a-
think of
Yeah,
sound.
like the
Mhm.
logical sound of it.
Right.
But I wasn't exactly sure about like how to use it, so
Mm-hmm.
I'm an acquaintance.
They use the part of it. That's
Mhm. Yeah, but that's true. I really don't know how to use it either, so I should. So now we're exactly like.
good. So see how the discussion makes you realize that
Mhm.
Where you are in
I-
familiarity.
Maybe I think I don't know if orthographically it should be a stranger, but I don't like I've seen it, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure
Mm-hmm.
how I would use it.
Right.
Well, and I'm using parts of it too, like ortho. I'm thinking like orthopedic. It's gotta be related.
Graphics, you're right.
Yeah,
Something
that's right,
right,
right. So
right.
physical writing,
I
yeah.
don't know. So maybe that should be
But-
a stranger. Is a stranger one you've never seen before?
It's one that you don't really have a clue of how to use
Okay,
it.
then I think I gotta move that over there. I know it has to do with reading,
Right.
but I don't know.
Right, because you're using the context of the rest of the words,
Right.
but you don't know how to, and like you said,
Yeah.
ortho,
So if that's the case, that's the same with morphological for me.
yeah, those are the ones that I was having trouble with originally when I,
More
Change.
morphology. Yeah, I think I just
alright, are you ready to try to figure out the other ones?
sure.
Okay, so phonologically, you were right with the sounds. It's the sounds that letters make, and it helps you to sound out words and hear the different sounds in the words. Orthographic has to do with writing. It's spelling correctly, basically.
Hmm. Definitely a stranger.
Lexical, you can think of lexicon too, so it's word knowledge based, basically. And then morphological is like suffixes and prefixes when you add them to the words and how it changes the definition. So obviously I did this in like fast forward motion because time purposes and whatnot, but you would go through each one of them. I may give you a little bit more time to talk about, well, you said you're best friends with encounter, what do you think the definition is, kind of as a reference, and to double check to make sure that you know that they know what they're talking about, kind of thing. So if you go to the next page, this is a little excerpt using all of those words, and so you can always refer back to help you. So what I want you to do is I just want you to read through it quickly and think about how knowing the definitions of these words that were strangers to you helped you to understand the text.
I just have a quick question.
Sure.
Is there a good number of words to pull out? Like, is there any research on that? Like,
They
if
said
you do
between like
more-
10 to 20, but it also depends on how long the article is.
Right.
Like this one, there's a lot of specific words, like specialized academic words that have to do with reading.
Mhm.
So you're going to pull out a little bit more, but it all depends. I would do
I
err
just-
on the lesser side
Yeah, I
and
just
smaller
wondered with
chunks.
kids if too many words, it's just too much to hold. Too much.
It could be,
Which
yeah.
then goes back to the readability of the passage and
Right.
why would you choose that if
Right,
there are that
right.
many?
I would say if it was just a passage, I would err on the lesser side, like 10 words.
Yeah.
But if it's like a unit concept thing, you can have as many as 20 words because it's going to be broken up over bits and
time.
pieces of time. And so it's going to be easier to digest because at the end of a unit, you may have 20 words that are brand new to them that they
Right.
need to know.
Right.
So. I like how you're flipping back and forth. Something I would maybe teach them also, kind of like with when you have footnotes is you can just write it right in there exactly, or put it in the margins, or like you're doing underlining and making sure that you're aware of those words that were tricky for you. And it's all about the awareness of what you know and what you don't know.
Right. Instead of just going right over
Exactly, exactly.
I wonder if we could do this backwards, like have them have a passage and underline words they don't know, and
That,
then
yep,
make your list.
absolutely. And that was one of the
May all be
alternatives.
strangers. I don't know.
Yep, that was the alternative. You can allow, I put it under variation, you can allow students to skim the text before if they are familiar with the concept of skimming, and to underline, exactly, and create that list. And you can just create a blank one of these and then choose the ones that they have in common. So when we say words that most students are unfamiliar with, choose those ones that are most difficult. So that's, yeah, I'm glad that you said that.
Oh yeah, and you see your second question is you can add ones to the previewing list.
Exactly, exactly. It's still a pretty meaty passage, so you still have to reread
I'm rereading it a
Exactly,
couple
you
times.
you have to, and that's why knowing the preview of the words, it makes it more accessible, but you still have to use reading strategies in order to understand what it's exactly saying.
That makes sense, because I feel like it's how I definitely learn new words when I'm reading and come up
Yeah.
with something new.
Yeah. And it all relates back to that indirect exposure and the importance of independent reading in order to gain a little bit more knowledge. So the next indirect learning piece is the Lady Word book. Have you ever heard of the Lady Word?
You've shown
showed
me
you.
this before.
This is by far the biggest, best book as far as teaching different types of vocabulary. And so it takes little anecdotes and little stories in order to teach big words. So this one is by far one of my favorites. So I'll read it to you real fast. It says, there once lived a sparrow by the name of Sydney. Now Sydney was different from all the other sparrows in his family. Sydney, you see, was 6 feet tall. His mother and father and brothers and sisters and cousins and aunts and uncles were only 3 inches tall. Sydney was very proud of his size. He would constantly brag that he was the tallest sparrow in the world. He would compare himself to the ostriches, whom he admired, and boast about things he could do. I can reach the branches of the tree, he said. I can look over tall hedges. I can, before anyone else, see the morning sun and the evening moon, and feel the autumn rain and the winter snow. All things that come from heaven reach me before they reach you. When company came to visit, Sydney Sparrow would say, "You are so short, and you can shake hands with the groundhogs and dine with the moles. You must eat berries from the thorn bush and the roots from the ground. In the company of other birds, you are no taller or shorter than most, but I am as tall as the ostriches. Don't you wish you were tall as I?" Sydney even said it to his school friends. "Don't you wish that you could roam with ostriches as I do? We would run together in the grasslands, take our meals under acai bushes, bathe in cold rivers, and stand watch for the lions. You are not my brothers. The ostriches are my brothers." One day, Sydney Sparrow's mother and father could no longer stand to hear him brag about being as tall as the ostriches, so they told him that he would have to leave the family and go away. Sydney did not understand. "If it gives me pleasure to run with the ostriches," he said, "why should you mind?" His father answered, "We are glad that you like the ostriches, but we are sad that you use this friendship to make fun of the sparrows." Sydney was shocked. "You would send me away?" His father replied, "Yep, I would send you away." Sydney asked. "I must leave?" His mother replied. "You must leave." Sydney Sparrow was not happy to leave his mother and father and all the other sparrows. He did not like being shut out of his family, and all because he bragged about his unusual ostrich size. So whenever someone has been deliberately left out or excluded from a group, think of Sydney, who was sent away from his home because he bragged about his unusual ostrich size, and you will remember the word ostracize.
I love that.
That's neat.
So it goes through the alphabet and it picks out gigantic words that students may not always come across in their reading and gives them a little anecdote to remember as a story. So at the end of the day, I would have the VIP in the class choose a letter, and then I would read the story to them. And they loved it. And so we created a sparkle word wall with our words that we learned. So we put ostracize on here, and we talked about, I would have them draw a picture maybe on the front of it so that it's like a visual that reminds them, and then the Frayer model on the back, exactly. With a kid-friendly definition, we talk about what would we put there, synonyms and antonyms and examples. So,
And this whole thing went up on the wall, or they have this too? They kept one?
no,
for
we
themselves?
just put it up on the wall, and we put it with a thumbtack so you could take it down if you wanted to remind yourself of what it was. And it was good to put the picture on the front because it was that visual reminder of what it meant. I got sparkle crayons for sparkle words, and so anytime we would come across a sparkle word, they get really excited. But this was a big motivator to learn the new.
And I like how quick it is. It's an
Exactly.
easy, like end of class.
Exactly.
I'm
5
thinking all
minutes.
along, what is the word going to be? It's not going to be ostrich, and then when you
Exactly. Like we did one. I think it was a basement, and it was about this guy who bragged about his job, and he got lowered down on the floors. Like if you were on the top floor, you were like the hot shot, and he kept getting demoted until he was in a basement. So when you think of lowering status, you think of the word abasement. So it's a cool way of introducing different sorts of vocabulary. Yeah. And it connects it to that story. So they have some way of like rooting their ideas in there. So that was
I will be buying those books.
I know, they're
yes,
great.
yeah, they're good. Amazon. Love Amazon. What else is new?
Oh, we all.
So the next one is semantic mapping, and you could do this before or after reading. And the purpose is to, again, build and activate that background knowledge, to show connections between words, and it's very discussion-based, so it's interactive for students. And if they're not interacting, then they're never going to truly be invested in the words. So what you do is you pick out a key concept or a keyword. In our case today, it's going to be geometry. And you have the students take like 2 minutes to write down as many words as they can think of that have to do with geometry, and they can't necessarily be wrong unless they talk about, like, I don't know, the backyard. Like, has nothing to do with it. But any sorts of words that have to do with geometry. So I want you to turn the page.
As you're reading it.
Do you need something to lean on?
Okay. All right.
Yeah, cards and wrists. So I want you to take 2 minutes to think of any word that has to do with geometry.
Oh, we just kind of slashing them around?
Slashing them in the top one.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll add some too. Alright, so wanna give me some of your words, and you put it up on the board, all the different words that you have. So just call them out.
Measurement.
Triangle.
Angle.
Parallel.
Polygon.
Perpendicular.
Shapes.
That was the first word I wrote down. Lines.
Math.
Engineer.
Ah.
3D. regular, irregular.
Trapezoid?
I had transformations.
Mhm.
Okay. So what you do is you just get as many words as you can and you put it in a word splash on the board. And then you have students, you pair them up, group them up, whatever you'd like to do. They have to take these words and they have to try to figure out categories
Mhm.
in which these words fit in, because our brain likes to think in different categories. And so you would talk about how you would categorize all of these different words. You can tell them, I only want you to think about 4 categories, so you can make it's a little bit more challenging, because the more specific you are, the more specific the categories are, the better your brain remembers it. Or if you want, you can make it more of a closed sort and you can tell them the categories. Or you can tell them the words and then they have to categorize them. So it's a lot of different variations on this one task. So if you could just take 2 minutes and try to think about some categories that you may use in order to fit these words in.
We
And you
do
can talk
that.
together. Yeah, you can talk together.
So one could be shapes, like
Yeah.
trapezoid, triangle, rectangle. Polygon, right?
Yeah, shapes, that sounds good. And then, terms. Maybe for like regular,
Mhm.
parallel.
I was thinking also using some of those words like descriptors, like parallel, perpendicular,
Yeah.
irregular, regular,
Mhm.
3D.
So it can be challenging, but it also gets you to
Yeah.
think and discuss the words and what the words have in common, and it gives you a chance. If you didn't know, say, what transformation means, you can talk to each other. Well, I don't really understand what that means. Can you help me with that one? So it gets you to really think about the words that you know and the words that you don't know.
Would you use that at the beginning of a unit as like a
You
preview,
could.
just to see what they know
You could.
already?
You could, yep.
Yeah.
Or you can use it at the end as a wrap up.
Yeah.
Before a test, if you want to get them to really make those connections. You can do it in the middle in order to see where they're at.
Mhm.
So it's any one of those sorts of things. It's kind of a flexible way of using it for anything.
I've done it as a review, but
Yeah.
I like the idea of doing it at the start. too.
Yeah, yeah. And
More
like
challenging.
It
They
is
don't-
very
yeah,
challenging.
They don't,
It
have,
is.
they don't all have the same background.
Right. Or you can do it at the beginning, have them put it on their chart paper, and then at the end, how would you change it?
Mm-hmm.
Are there different categories, more specific categories, things like that. So that's semantic mapping. Very cool. The next indirect way of teaching, have you ever heard of the game Name-Its?
Name it.
Name-Its.
Yeah.
They're little cards. And so basically, I just give each student a Post-it note and I ask them to pick a color, any color, it doesn't matter, so we'll go with the orange one, and it says name different types of, and it gives you categories. So this is just a way of being more word conscious about things and thinking inside categories and making those connections with your brain. And so you would say, okay, today our little break is going to be name different types of junk food. And then I give them a minute, and they have to come up with as many as they can on their own, and we compare the different ones. So it's just a little brain break, but really still thinking about
Can I
birds.
take a front of that?
Yeah.
Maybe. No eat.
Nope.
Amazon?
Yes. Of course. Of course. So it's just an interesting way of thinking about it.
Cool.
So the next direct instruction piece is categorizing. Okay, so all of these really go around making connections between words that you know with words that you don't know, and how you can think about them together. So this could be after reading or it could be before reading if they are familiar with the words, but mostly after reading or after a unit. And it's to make those connections. It's interactive, lots of discussions. You can clarify words that you don't know, clarify words that you do know, make more specific connections. So basically what you do is you provide words for the students. So I was thinking about 5th grade curriculum. And I had to clear out the cobwebs. And so I did a social studies based one for the causes to the Revolutionary War. And so I picked out all the different words that may be difficult or maybe new to them that they would have to learn. So after we did the whole unit on the causes of the Revolutionary War, here are all the things that I hope that you learned from it. And what you would do is you can either give them Post-it notes to make the categories, but I also like buckets. And so you put out the buckets, and you may say, okay, I'm only giving you 4 buckets today, so you only have 4 categories. Target, dollar. So just, and then you put the categories on the Post-it note. So you give them the words, they put them out on the table, and then they have to try to think the same thing as a semantic mapping. How would you fit them together? And then you put them in the bucket. And it really forces students to have conversations about what they know, what they don't know. It forces them to have conversations about which category they think it would fit in, because maybe it could fit in more than one, but they have to defend it. So it's getting them to think about explaining their thinking. So I would like for you to try to think about, and honestly, when I took these words, I just took words that I could remember trying to teach students, but I really wasn't
I haven't taught this unit.
I really wasn't thinking about categories, so I'm not really sure how many categories this would be.
So would you have small groups doing this around the classroom?
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
And then what's neat about that too is then they can share their different categories and
Right, and I
hear
put
with each other.
Blanks.
Oh, you did
blank,
blanks
so
on
if you
purpose.
can think of words that aren't in here that you think would fit into a category, or you thought the teacher should have had, they can feel empowered to add their words.
So people and places kind of
That's what
sticks
I
out
was
to me.
thinking. And
Can that be one?
Actions.
Oh yeah.
Repeal. Maybe that was it.
Ordering.
Declaration. That could be a thing too, though.
I have the cornering act, right?
Well, and it's also interesting to see how students organize things. Like, how would you, like that, and you can give suggestions of how do you organize things together.
It's about too, though.
Events.
Causes. Are you doing people and places together?
I was to start, but because we only have, what do we have, 5?
Yeah.
We might be able to separate.
So, Melissa, the people. Stuff is neutral.
Could be people.
Yeah.
People that work for them. Yeah. Neutral.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a stretch.
Like,
There's always
defend
categories.
yourself. You can defend
Right.
yourself.
Alright, I'm thinking these are all like actions. Things like a declaration.
Action. Can you have a miscellaneous category?
I mean, technically you could. But remember, the more specific,
Can we
the more
connect
action.
these 3? Because these are the 3 that are left over.
And what's interesting is sometimes when you create these different words, you have a vision of what you think the students should do as far as how you put them together. And it's amazing
different
how
things.
different it is. Like when I originally put these words, I thought propaganda, intolerable, liberty, taxation, treason, these are all the causes. Intolerable is the intolerable acts. Propagandos were the things that the colonists did in order to try to promote the war. Liberty is obviously what they're fighting for. Exactly. All of them basically could fit together as far as causes or actions that led to the cause,
Right.
you know? So. And it also gives them an opportunity to clarify things that maybe, Lexington, I don't really remember that one. Can you tell me how that relates to this? And,
Right.
you know, gets them to really start talking about these different words and categorizing them. So.
Very cool.
Nice, yeah.
You could do it, obviously, Bonus and Pinnell does it a lot with, like patterns, like spelling patterns and things like that, but it's also good to connect the concepts too.
Yeah, I did a lot of words, but mostly based on, like you said, like
Exactly.
doubling the last letter.
Mhm.
Melissa's
spelling.
Yeah, or it could be based on the meaning of the words or whatever it may be, you know, roots, different things like that. So the next indirect instruction is homophones. Homophones are really difficult for students as far as spelling goes. So what I would do with some of my fifth graders is I would put a challenge question up on the board, and they had to figure out which homophones I was talking about, and it's based on a riddle. And at the end of the period, they would give me a post-it note, and the key was to be able to spell the answer correctly, because obviously homophones, it's all about the spelling and knowing which one's which. So for example, this one was, how does Moose begin a letter to his cousin? It's a homophone.
Dear, D-E-A-R, dear, D-E-E-R.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So thinking about how those spellings are. Another one is, what is a complete opening in the ground?
Hole.
A whole hole. Exactly. So it's really discussing what those things mean. And like I said, I would just write it up on the corner on the board, and when the kids came in and they finished their do now, they had the opportunity to do that, or if they finished an activity early on, and they can hand it in at the end. We'd go over it, and then I'd take a look, and I'd give them like a ticket or something to put in the bucket. But it's just a way of them thinking and trying to spell them correctly.
Yeah.
This is another homophone game. And what you could do is in small groups, they come in groups of 5, and there are 3 sentences and 2 words. So you have to figure out which word goes in each sentence. So you could put all these out face up, and you can give them their notebooks, and they can try to figure out which word goes in which sentence. Or another way you can do it is you can shuffle them, hand them out to 5 students, and they can read their sentence or read their word, and you have to figure out who pairs up with who, and whoever the odd man out is actually the winner. So they're all groups of 5 different words having to do with homophones.
What's that called?
It's called Night Nights, the homophone games.
Nice.
Yeah.
Oh boy, I have a lot of things to buy.
But again, it's just like a word workup, like in getting them to think before you start. So warm up almost for your brain.
Right.
But
It's just, I like all of these ideas that you have are just quick.
exactly,
I like
and you're more likely to use them if they're fast.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't take a lot of time, because time is of the essence always.
Right.
So the 4th strategy, we only have this one and one more, is semantic feature analysis. And this one is one of the coolest ones and one of the most challenging to create, I think, as a teacher. And why it's so cool is because this is the way our brain thinks. It thinks in connections. And when you think about 2 words or 2 concepts, you think about how they relate to each other or how they don't relate to each other, and similarities and differences. And that's how your brain is wired. That's how you connect all these different things. So this is a visual representation of how your brain would think and organize different things. It is discussion-based. And you can use it usually after reading or after a unit, but you can use it before if they understand it. So this is what you're going to be doing. You make a grid, and you put the words in there, and you put the categories across the top, or vice versa. So these are all of the words, obviously having to do with things that you go on, ways you get from spot A to spot B. And there are different variations of this, and for today we're just going to do, you put a plus in the box if you think it applies. So is a path narrow? Is a path wide? Is a path paved? Is a path unpaved? And you put a negative if it's not, if the feature doesn't apply to it. Now, you're also going to find with this one that it's sometimes the case and sometimes not the case.
Right.
So you can also say, well, you can do this one. You know, it's kind of like a maybe. And you're also going to have kids who maybe don't understand or know one of these, and they could put a question mark. I'm not really sure. I don't really know how that, if that's the case or not. But the purpose is that you need to fill in every single square. You can't leave a square empty. So usually this falls under all of them. Another way you can do it is you can do it always, sometimes, never. ASN. You can do, sometimes they say rather than a negative, you put a 0, because negatives are really easy to turn into pluses if the student thinks they're wrong, you know. So if you really want to track where they are, you may want to make it into a 0 so it's not so easy to change. And students, you can add some things on the bottom so that they can add some words that may also fall into it. So what I want you to do is I want you to turn the page, and you have this exactly on your paper. So for example, a path. Okay, path, and this is where you'd have students talk to each other and try to figure it out, and you can work together. Is the path narrow? Thinking about my own background knowledge. When I walk on a path, it's usually narrow, it's not usually wide, there's usually trees on either side, but it's clear enough, and so you talk it through with one another. And you may come to parts where you don't agree, and that's okay, but as long as you can defend yourself, that's the purpose of it. So you can work together and try to figure out how you would fill in this grid.
Okay. So path.
Narrow.
Yeah, but narrow in comparison to what? Like it's narrow in comparison to a highway, but
Because in comparison to being wide.
right. But I feel like it can be kind of wide too. Not as wide as a highway.
Right, so I think with this, it's considered narrow. If you look at the other.
So it has to either be narrow or wide.
Yeah.
I think it can be either.
So you
Because
think
I've been on
plus or
paths.
minus?
I've been on paths that you have to walk one at a time, and then I've been on paths where maybe there could be like 2 bicycles on each side
And
coming,
like our dogs too.
going in the direction. So I
And the
think
bike path is.
I say plus minus
So same thing
for
for
both.
wide.
Yeah, paved
It can't be
Can
paved
be.
or not.
and paved, same. For walking. Yeah, I think all paths are for
Yeah,
walking, right?
usually. Well, or for riding like a bike.
Right. But can you at least walk on every path? Yeah. For
Driving.
driving.
Not usually.
No, they're not usually for
I don't
driving.
think they're intended for for driving.
Although on the canal, the path along the canal, that
Only special vehicles.
special
allow.
vehicles, right? So we'll say no
Exceptions.
driving. So a trail.
I think that's usually narrow.
Think
And
about a
trail
mountain.
for
Think
the
about a
woods.
trail on a mountain though, coming down like a ski trail.
Yeah.
That can be wide.
That
That
can
can
be
that
wide.
can go the width of the
That's
whole
true.
mountain. I say either or.
Yeah.
And same with.
Wide.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's paved.
Mm-mm. It is unpaved.
Walking can be.
Yep.
Driving,
No.
not usually.
Road.
Road.
There are narrow roads.
Yeah, I think they
I think
can
if
be.
you've
It's
ever been to
stressful.
Hawaii, they have like those
Okay.
single lane roads that are
Right.
supposed to be meant for 2 cars, and those are very narrow.
Wide can be. Road.
Can be paved.
Yeah. Doesn't have to
Can be unpaved.
Walking. People walk on roads.
I'm getting confused on that one though because, like a highway is a road.
It's not really meant for walking, I guess.
But it's not really a road either. A highway's really not a road. And it's not really a road because that's down here, like freeway. That's different.
Right.
Yeah.
So a road is for walking, right?
And for driving.
And for driving.
So I'm just gonna stop you real fast. So see how you're using, especially with trail, you're using your background knowledge. A trail can mean many, many different things. So just thinking about all the different trails that you know about, and so when you're reading, and they're talking about a trail, you're able to access that background knowledge because you've already talked about it and discussed it. And you may not have thought of a ski trail.
I didn't at all. I was picturing a totally different trail.
Exactly,
And
exactly.
I was like, oh yeah.
Exactly. So it gives you those different ideas to access that knowledge for when you're reading.
Nice.
Neat.
One way that I used it, because I really like it if I can use my brain power to try to figure out how to use it. When we came back from December break, we were in the middle of our government unit, and so we just talked about the 3 branches of government, and of course, December break came, they came back in January, I'm like, oh god, we didn't finish it, so how am I going to brush up some of their ideas? So I had them work in partners, and I put the different branches of government along the top, and then I put all the different things down here. So which one has to do with Congress? Which one has to do with the president? Which one has to do with making laws? And they were able to discuss and remember which one had to do with which.
That's neat.
I like that a lot.
Yeah, and so it's also a way of studying. So I could go down the lane and just say, okay, executive branch is located in Washington, D.C. It has to do with the president. It's in charge of X, Y, and Z. So it's just a way of organizing your thinking legislative branch, not the case, and so I got them really to discuss what they remembered before
Right.
break.
I like that.
Yeah.
I can see what you're saying though about how this one is the most challenging to create.
Yes.
Because you really
Yes.
have to. It requires a lot of thinking.
I've
And
seen
how
this
they relate
in
to
lots
each
of
other.
Looking at books, and I'm
Mhm.
always like, plus minus, what is this?
Right.
What?
Right. Well, you can use it with analyzing characters. So you can take a bunch of characters. I was going to try to think of Winn-Dixie, but I assumed you probably read it, but I wasn't positive, and I knew you read it.
Mm-hmm.
So then I was like, I need to do something that we all know.
Right.
And so you can do it with character analysis. So put character traits across the top and characters along the bottom, and then that gets them to really think, like, was that person really a friendly person, or were they motivated in different ways? So it gets them to analyze different characters. You can do it. A good one to do it for is geometry. I didn't want to do too many doubles, but like thinking about the relationship of the shapes, how many angles, how many vertices, like all their properties. So
That's neat.
I will use that.
alrighty. Then this is my last indirect teaching model, and it's just books that have to do with vocabulary.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it's talks about that book.
And the boy, yeah.
The word.
Yeah. So it's just really just encouraging students to be more aware of the words and interesting vocabulary. And I mean, I love miscellaneous.
We did a vocabulary parade 1 year.
Oh, really? Yeah, and I loved how the way she talks, and sage, not a bush, and da-da-da-da, you know, and just giving those definitions at the end. I think that's a really cool way of doing it. So this one I thought was really cool because it was Andrew Clement. And I like the way it was written. It says, it was an ordinary Monday morning in Walla Walla until Lulu raised her hand in class. Mrs. Bell, I feel like a nitwit. My homework is all higgledy-piggledy. Last night, it was in tip-top shape, but now it's a big mishmash. Mrs. Bell said, nitwit, higgledy-piggledy, mishmash, Lulu, stop that flip-flop chitter-chatter or you'll be in double trouble. So it's kind of cool with the playing on words and those different things. And so later in the book, and it has all the different like features like in comic books and little quotes, but I like this page the most. Ticky-tacky, knick-knack, coochie-coochie-coo, hubba-bubba, and like all those different terms that like students don't necessarily have familiarity with, but sometimes we just throw them out there and it's kind of funny. Yeah. Hippy-dippy, hoity-toity, hotshot, like all those. So I just thought it was a fun book to read.
Double trouble in Walla Walla.
Yeah. Yep. So just fun books to read for students.
Yeah, very cool.
All right. And our last one is called scaling. And you may have used this in different word instruction, but it can be used after reading mostly or before reading if they have familiarity with the words. And it allows students to understand shades of meaning between different things. So it also encourages students to use precise words with their writing and word choice and things like that, and realizing that words do carry specific meanings and some are better than others to use. And it shows connections between words, how they relate, how are they the same, how are they different. So it really focuses in on synonyms and antonyms and different shades of that. So you choose a word and you give its opposite. So for example, this is using it in social studies terms. So you have loyal and treasonous. Those are the two words that I chose. And you leave some room on the outside in case there are words that are even more extreme than those two words. And then you discuss the words that you would put in between on either side. And like this is the one in the middle, neutral, you know. And then as it goes up, it becomes closer to loyal. As it goes down, it becomes closer to treasonous. So ambivalent, not really caring, non-supportive, dishonest, or lying. And sometimes you may find words that you think are at the same level. And as long as you can explain why you think they're at the same level, not more or less, that's fine. Two-faced, conniving, hypocritical, and as you can see, like the words get a little bit more intense, you know. So I did an alternative take on it for our purposes. And I took the word said, thinking about said is dead, and thinking about in terms of volume. So you can say said, and said is so neutral, but how can you show its increase in volume or its decrease in volume? Said, like you said, like I said, you may say I shouted, and that gives a whole different picture than just I've said this, you know. So this is an interesting way of trying to throw out really boring vocabulary. Another one could be, you could put look in the middle, glance, stare. Those have two completely opposite meanings of each other and all those different nuances. And what's good about this is you can also scaffold it. You can provide the words for them, and then they have to put them in the scale. And like I said, you can put the word in the middle, or you can put it at either side for them. So I would like for the two of you to try to think of different words. And what you could do also is you can give them a piece of scrap paper where they can write their words, and
But I
then
was just thinking that, like,
so.
I'm reluctant to like place them in a spot. because-
Right.
Wanna write them on here?
Oh yeah, we could do that. Can we do that?
Or take a sticky note.
All right.
So it's kind of like when we did the semantic
The word
mapping,
slash.
you throw the word
Yeah.
slash out there, and then you think about how you would
And then
organize
what
it.
we come- Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So said. Do you want to go increase in volume first?
I'm sorry, with whispered.
Okay. Well,
So increase in what?
whispered, muttered,
Mm.
mouthed,
Mouth.
That's the only thing allowed ones.
Well, that's fine.
That's okay. We can
We
do
go to
that.
shrieked.
Bellowed.
So see how if Kristen didn't know what the word bellowed mean, you can demonstrate it for her and.
Right.
Hello, please.
Pretty much how I talk all the time.
It's my volume, my normal volume.
Pretty much. You know. Oh my gosh, how many times have we done this
I
lesson with
know.
our kids? Like,
So far away from it. We need a word bank, please.
I know, I have
Sample,
one here.
please.
I have some really good books if you wanted for different vocabulary things for Aha, said is dead. There's a bunch of words if you want to use that.
Ooh, barked. I like that.
Let's go like angry tone.
Babbled, blurted. That can be,
I
not
don't know
necessarily
about volume.
volume, right?
Howl. Whimpered. That's a normal one.
Moaned, mumbled.
Don't make connotations and stuff.
Right. Whales.
Swore.
Do we have whales?
No.
And it's okay to put different words like
Yeah.
trying to think of one of the ones that you said. Like confessed. That doesn't necessarily have a volume, but it's a good way.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good alternative for said. So you may be able to just put a comma and put that
Mhm.
word because it's still a good vocabulary word to use instead of just said, and it gives that neutral tone.
Yeah, that's
You know what I
true.
mean?
I
Like, you
like
still
that,
may
yeah.
have
like
a sentence-
synonyms across.
Exactly. So you may have a sentence that you want to say in a neutral tone, like said, but it doesn't have an increase or decrease
Mhm.
volume, but it's different.
Mhm.
Exactly. And
I like that option.
yeah.
Yeah.
Because
Like
you don't want
teased.
them to push aside good words that come to their mind.
Exactly. So teased. You may not tease somebody in a very loud way, but it has a different meaning than just I said you're a big baby.
Right.
I teased you're a big baby. Or you know what I mean? So it just gives a different meaning for it. But,
I've done this with sticky notes and
Mhm.
mostly just for synonyms of like, how else can you say kind?
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
then the sticky note.
Right.
And then other groups come around and they rearrange them.
Yeah.
And then the first group comes back and they're like, oh,
yeah.
I agree, I don't agree. This is why.
When I taught 5th grade, one of my favorite lessons was the said is dead funeral. And so I gave a bunch of overused words to each group, and it's kind of morbid. They created a headstone with that word in the middle, and they had to come up with the epitaph of the word, and like son of yelled and whispered. They just wrote, and it was so interesting.
You do
And it was-
survive by,
And,
and then
yeah, and you could do,
that too.
and it was just interesting. Like, we missed you, we've used you since kindergarten, and we will miss you,
Right.
you know, immensely. And then they had flowers, and in the middle was the word, and on the outside were all the synonyms for
Right.
that word. And so we created like a graveyard, like
Yeah.
I said. It was a little bit morbid. They were black that day. We played like the taps, and we went through each one of them, but they got into it because it was something to
Right.
invest in.
Yeah.
Right.
So, where I would go with this professional development, obviously today I was just previewing and connecting, but the next level would be talking about tiered words, and which words to teach more intensely, like the words that you really need to go in depth for, and using the FAIR model and things of that sort. So that's where I would go in the future if I had a session 2 of this.
Well, let's do it.
In the future,
It really was.
Do it so
On
much.
the back page is a little survey of
Right.
what you thought, what you get out of it, all that good stuff.